I am Madeline, 57 years old, and after 30 years of marriage to Richard, I discovered the most painful betrayal imaginable. My husband and my daughter-in-law, Sarah, were having an affair right under my nose while we prepared for divorce. I found evidence, just a week before signing papers, that would have left me with almost nothing. Before I tell you how I turned the tables on their betrayal, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like and subscribe button. Trust me, you'll want to hear what happened when I walked into that lawyer's office with evidence they never saw coming. I met Richard when I was 25 and he was 27. Back then, I was just starting my real estate career in Boston, full of ambition and dreams. Richard worked as a financial advisor at a prestigious firm downtown. We connected at a charity gala where I was volunteering. He approached me with a charming smile and a glass of champagne, and by the end of the night, I knew there was something special between us. Our courtship was a whirlwind. Richard was attentive, supportive, and seemed genuinely interested in my career aspirations. Within a year, we were married in a beautiful ceremony overlooking the Boston Harbor. I remember feeling like I had found my forever partner, someone who would stand beside me through all of life's challenges. In those early years, Richard encouraged my real estate ambitions. I worked tirelessly to build my business from scratch, often working weekends and evenings to meet with clients while also preparing for our future family. When I became pregnant with our son James, 2 years into our marriage, Richard assured me we would make it work. And we did, at least for a while. James was born in the spring, a healthy, beautiful baby boy who immediately became the center of our world. I scaled back my work hours temporarily, but maintained my client relationships. Richard stepped up during this time, taking on more responsibilities at home while also advancing in his career. We were a team, or so I believed. As James grew, so did our ambitions. We bought a lovely colonial house in the suburbs, complete with a spacious yard where James could play. I resumed my real estate work full-time, gradually building a reputation as one of the top agents in the greater Boston area. Richard's career in financial advising also flourished, and he eventually started his own investment firm with seed money that came partly from my earnings and partly from a small inheritance I had received when my father passed away. That financial contribution to his business would become critically important decades later, though I had no way of knowing it at the time. James grew into a bright, ambitious young man who seemed to inherit the best qualities from both of us. He excelled academically and set his sights on Harvard Business School, following in his father's footsteps. Richard beamed with pride whenever he spoke about James, often taking credit for his achievements while minimizing my influence. It was during James's sophomore year at Harvard that he met Sarah. She was studying marketing and came from a moderately wealthy family from Connecticut. The first time James brought her home for Thanksgiving, I noticed how quickly she charmed Richard. She laughed at all his jokes, asked intelligent questions about his business, and seemed genuinely interested in our family dynamics. I welcomed Sarah with open arms. She was beautiful, well-educated, and seemed to make James happy. After they married following graduation, I helped them find their first home not far from ours. I wanted to be a supportive mother-in-law, not the intrusive kind you read about in advice columns. Perhaps that desire to give them space prevented me from seeing what was happening right before my eyes. Around 5 years ago, when James and Sarah had been married for about 3 years, I began noticing subtle changes in Richard. He became increasingly secretive about our finances, despite the fact that I had always been involved in our investment decisions. When I would ask questions about certain accounts, he would brush me off, saying it was all taken care of, and I shouldn't worry my pretty head about it. That condescension was new, and it stung. I had contributed significantly to our wealth, both through my own successful career and by supporting his business ventures. Yet somehow, over the years, Richard had begun treating me as though I was financially naive. I also noticed small withdrawals from our joint accounts that Richard couldn't or wouldn't explain. Nothing large enough to cause immediate alarm, but consistent enough to raise questions. When confronted, he would claim they were business expenses or investments that were too complicated to explain. The emotional distance grew alongside the financial secrecy. Richard's business trips became more frequent, often extending over weekends. Our conversations became superficial, focused on household logistics rather than meaningful connection. The intimacy that had once been a cornerstone of our marriage gradually disappeared. Family gatherings took on a strange new dynamic as well. I couldn't quite put my finger on it, but there was something about the way Richard and Sarah interacted that made me uncomfortable. They often seemed to share inside jokes or would have hushed conversations that abruptly ended when I or James approached. I dismissed these observations, telling myself I was being paranoid or overly sensitive. Looking back, the signs were all there. The lingering glances, the unnecessary touches, the private smiles. But who wants to believe that their husband of nearly 3 decades is having an affair with their daughter-in-law? It was unthinkable, the stuff of tawdry daytime television, not my carefully constructed life. Instead, I focused on my work, throwing myself into my real estate business with renewed vigor. My success became both my distraction and my solace. If my marriage was crumbling beneath me, at least I had built something of my own that could sustain me. But the truth has a way of demanding to be acknowledged no matter how deeply we try to bury it under denial and distraction. The breaking point came on a crisp autumn evening. I had been reviewing our credit card statements, something I did regularly as part of managing our household finances. A series of charges caught my attention: expensive jewelry from Tiffany dinner reservations at restaurants we had never visited together, and a weekend stay at a luxury hotel in Newport, Rhode Island. These weren't business expenses. They were gifts and romantic getaways that I had never been part of. The realization hit me like a physical blow. Richard was cheating on me. With trembling hands, I printed out the statements and waited for Richard to return from his latest business trip. When he walked through the door that evening, I was sitting calmly at our kitchen table, the papers arranged neatly before me. "We need to talk," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Richard's expression shifted from surprise to wariness as he took in the scene. He set down his briefcase and loosened his tie, buying time before joining me at the table. "What's all this?" he asked, though the flicker of recognition in his eyes told me he already knew. "Receipts for gifts I never received and trips we never took together," I replied. "I'd like an explanation, Richard." He didn't even try to deny it. Instead, he sighed deeply, as though I had presented him with an inconvenient business problem rather than evidence of his betrayal. "I've been meaning to talk to you about this, Madeline," he said, his tone disturbingly businesslike. "I think we both know our marriage hasn't been working for a long time." I sat in stunned silence as he continued explaining in clinical terms how we had grown apart, how we wanted different things from life, how perhaps it would be best if we considered a separation. Not once did he acknowledge the affairs or apologize for his deception. 30 years, Richard," I finally managed to say. 30 years together, and this is how you choose to end it, with lies and cheating." He had the audacity to look annoyed. "This isn't productive, Madeline. I'm trying to be reasonable here. I think we should consider divorce as the most logical step forward." Logical. As though 3 decades of shared life could be dissolved with the same dispassionate analysis he applied to his investment portfolios. In the days that followed, I moved between shock, grief, and rage. I called my closest friend Nancy, who immediately came over with wine and tissues, letting me cycle through my emotions without judgment. She was the one who suggested I consult a lawyer, immediately given Richard's controlling behavior with our finances. "He's been planning this," she said firmly. "Men like Richard don't make moves without calculating every angle. You need protection." I knew she was right. The following Monday, I made an appointment with Patricia Wells, a divorce attorney known for her fierce advocacy for women in high-asset divorces. Before I could even begin building my legal strategy, we had to face telling James. Richard insisted we do it together, presenting a united front about our mutual decision to separate. I agreed, not wanting to turn our son against his father despite everything. We invited James and Sarah to dinner at our home. The tension was palpable as we sat around the dining table where we had shared countless family meals. After an awkward dinner of barely touched food, Richard cleared his throat and delivered the news with the same emotional detachment he had shown me. James looked between us in confusion. But why you guys always seem so solid? Sometimes people just grow in different directions, Richard replied smoothly. Your mother and I will always care about each other, but we believe this is the best decision for both of us. I remained silent, unable to maintain the charade that this was a mutual decision, but unwilling to burden James with the ugly truth. James turned to me, his eyes pleading for a different explanation. Mom, is this what you want too? My heart broke for him. At 32, he was hardly a child, but no matter how old, learning your parents are separating is painful. Sometimes relationships reach a point where they can't be saved, I said carefully. I wish things were different, but they're not. What surprised me most was Sarah's reaction. While James processed the news with visible distress, Sarah was oddly composed, almost prepared. She immediately offered support to Richard, suggesting neighborhoods where he might find a suitable apartment and offering to help him search. Her solicitousness toward my husband seemed excessive, but at the time I attributed it to her discomfort with the situation. James, on the other hand, seemed to blame me more than his father. Did you even try counseling? He asked accusingly. 30 years is a long time to just throw away. His words cut deep. Richard had successfully positioned himself as the reasonable party and me as the one giving up. I didn't defend myself not wanting to turn my son against his father by revealing the truth. That decision would haunt me in the weeks that followed. As Richard moved out and the divorce proceedings began, I threw myself into two pursuits, maintaining my real estate business and working with my lawyer to ensure I received a fair settlement. Patricia warned me that Richard had likely been preparing for this split for years, potentially hiding assets and minimizing my contributions to our shared wealth. Men in finance know exactly how to make money disappear, she cautioned. We'll need to be vigilant. I provided her with all the financial documents I could access, but it quickly became apparent that Richard had been systematically limiting my knowledge of our true financial picture for years. Bank statements showed transfers to accounts I didn't recognize. Investment portfolios had been restructured without my knowledge, despite my name being on the documents. Richard's initial settlement offer delivered through his attorney confirmed my worst fears. He was proposing a division that would leave me with our family home and about 30% of our visible assets, claiming that the lion's share of our wealth had been generated solely through his business acumen and investment strategies. The proposal conveniently overlooked my significant financial contributions to starting his firm and the support my real estate income had provided throughout our marriage. Patricia was outraged. This is insulting, she said, tossing the proposal onto her desk. He's banking on your emotional exhaustion to make you accept less than you deserve. We're going to fight this, Madeline. And fight we would, though I had no idea yet just how personal and painful that battle would become. One Tuesday afternoon, about 3 months into our separation, I needed to drop off some medical records Richard had requested for an insurance matter. He had moved into a luxury apartment building downtown close to his office. He told me he would be in meetings all day, but that I could leave the documents with the building manager. When I arrived, the friendly older manager greeted me warmly. "Oh, Mrs. Baker, go right up. The door should be unlocked since the cleaning service just finished." I was surprised Richard hadn't mentioned the cleaning service, but I thanked the manager and took the elevator to the 12th floor. The apartment door was indeed unlocked, and I stepped into what was clearly a bachelor's paradise: sleek modern furniture, a state-of-the-art entertainment system, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Boston skyline. I placed the medical files on the kitchen counter and was about to leave when something caught my eye in the living room. A woman's scarf was draped casually over one of the armchairs. Next to it, on the side table, sat a half-empty glass of wine with a distinct lipstick mark on the rim. My stomach tightened. I knew Richard was dating. It was naive to think otherwise. Our marriage was over, and he was free to see other women. Still, the evidence of another woman in his space, so soon after our separation, stung more than I wanted to admit. I was turning to leave when another detail stopped me cold. On the coffee table sat a bottle of perfume. Not just any perfume, but a distinctive niche fragrance that I had helped James select as a gift for Sarah on their last anniversary. I remembered the shopping trip clearly. Sarah had mentioned loving the scent after sampling it at a department store, and I had suggested that James buy it for her as a special treat. My heart began racing. It could be a coincidence, I told myself. Perhaps this scent had become more popular recently. I was being paranoid, jumping to the worst possible conclusion based on a perfume bottle. But deep down I knew. The unsettling interactions between Richard and Sarah over the years, her strange behavior when we announced our separation, her eagerness to help Richard find an apartment. The pieces were falling into place with sickening clarity. I shouldn't have looked further, but I couldn't stop myself. I moved toward the bedroom, my legs feeling like lead. The door was partially open, and I pushed it wider. The bed was neatly made, but on the nightstand lay a delicate gold bracelet with a distinctive charm in the shape of a compass. I recognized it immediately as the bracelet James had given Sarah for their 5th wedding anniversary. He had shown it to me before giving it to her, explaining that the compass symbolized that no matter where life took them, they would always find their way back to each other. The irony was almost too much to bear. I sank onto the edge of the bed, my mind racing. Could they really be having an affair? My husband and my daughter-in-law? It seemed too cruel, too soap operatic to be real. But the evidence was mounting, and the sick feeling in my stomach told me I was right. Before leaving, I checked one more place. Richard had mentioned setting up a home office in the 2nd bedroom. I found it easily furnished with his familiar desk and filing cabinets. His computer sat on the desk, still logged in. Richard had always been careless with his technology, a fact that had frustrated me over the years, but now presented an opportunity. I hesitated only briefly before sitting down at his desk. His calendar was open on the screen, and I scrolled back through the previous months. There they were regular meetings labeled only with the letter S, often scheduled for afternoons when I had standing appointments with clients and James would be traveling for his consulting job. With shaking hands, I checked his text messages and email. It didn't take long to find what I was looking for. Exchanges between Richard and Sarah, some innocuous on the surface, but laden with double meanings and private jokes. Others more explicit, leaving no doubt about the nature of their relationship. There were photos too, Sarah in locations I recognized as Richard's apartment and various hotel rooms. Richard and Sarah together looking intimate and comfortable in a way that spoke of a long-term relationship, not a recent fling. The timestamps on these exchanges confirmed my worst fears. This affair hadn't begun after our separation. Based on the digital trail before me, Richard and Sarah had been involved for at least a year, possibly longer. I felt physically ill. The betrayal was bad enough coming from Richard, but Sarah, she was family. She had sat across from me at countless family dinners, accepted my advice and help, all while carrying on with my husband behind my back. And my son, my poor James, was completely in the dark. His life built on a foundation of lies. I forced myself to take photos of the most damning evidence with my phone, my hands trembling so badly I had to try several times to get clear images. Then I carefully returned everything to its original state and left the apartment, somehow maintaining my composure until I reached my car. Once inside, I completely broke down. Sobs racked my body as the full weight of the betrayal crashed over me. It wasn't just the end of my marriage anymore. It was a betrayal so complete, so devastating, that it threatened to unravel the fabric of our entire family. I called Nancy, barely able to form coherent sentences through my tears. She immediately understood the gravity of the situation. "Don't confront them yet," she advised firmly. "You need to think strategically here, Maddie. This changes everything about the divorce. Get yourself to Patricia's office first thing tomorrow." Nancy was right, of course. As painful as it was, this revelation potentially gave me significant leverage in the divorce proceedings. But the thought of my son unwittingly married to a woman who was sleeping with his father made me physically sick. "What about James?" I whispered. "He deserves to know." Nancy's voice softened. He does, but timing is everything. If you tell him now, it could blow up in ways that might ultimately hurt your case. Richard and Sarah could deny everything, paint you as a vindictive soon-to-be ex, making wild accusations. You need more concrete evidence first. I knew she was right, though it felt wrong to keep such a devastating secret from my son. But I needed to be smart. For James' sake as much as my own, I needed to approach this methodically. The next day, I contacted a private investigator recommended by Patricia. Frank Donovan was a former police detective with a reputation for discretion and thoroughness. I shared what I had discovered and asked him to gather conclusive evidence of the affair. Over the next 2 weeks, Frank provided regular updates. He documented multiple meetings between Richard and Sarah at hotels and at Richard's apartment. He obtained security footage showing them entering and leaving together, captured photos of them in intimate moments in public places, and even recorded a conversation in a restaurant where they explicitly discussed their relationship and their plans for after the divorce was finalized. According to Frank's findings, their affair had indeed been going on for approximately 14 months. It had begun at a time when Richard and I were still very much married, with no discussion of separation. Sarah and James had been married for 6 years at that point. The evidence was overwhelming and irrefutable. But as damning as it was personally, Patricia reminded me that adultery, while morally reprehensible, wasn't necessarily a game changer in our no-fault divorce state. The affair is just the tip of the iceberg, she said. I'm more concerned about whether they've been conspiring to hide assets or defraud you financially. She recommended expanding Frank's investigation to include financial matters. Had Sarah been helping Richard conceal assets? Was there a paper trail that would prove financial conspiracy? As it turned out, there was. With the devastating knowledge of Richard and Sarah's affair weighing heavily on my mind, I met with my divorce attorney, Maria Rodriguez, in her downtown office. The space was warm and inviting, designed to put clients at ease during some of the most difficult conversations of their lives. Maria herself projected both compassion and fierce competence. In her mid-50s, with salt and pepper hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing, she had built a reputation for helping women secure fair settlements in high-asset divorces. The settlement offer is worse than we initially thought, Maria explained, spreading documents across her polished mahogany desk. Richard is not only trying to minimize the marital assets, but also attempting to completely exclude you from the business ventures you helped build. She pointed to specific clauses in the dense legal document. This paragraph here effectively denies your claim to any business holdings, arguing they were developed solely through his expertise and investment. And this section, it severely undervalues your contributions to the family finances over the 30-year marriage. I stared at the papers, anger rising to replace the shock and grief that had dominated the past weeks. He wants to erase 3 decades of partnership, I said quietly, as if I was just a bystander in our life together. Maria nodded grimly. Based on his current proposal, you would walk away with barely 30% of your actual assets. The family home, your personal retirement account, and a modest monthly alimony that would end if you remarry. Meanwhile, he keeps all business interests, the vacation properties, and the majority of the investment portfolios. How can he possibly justify this? I asked. He's claiming that your real estate business was entirely separate from his financial ventures, that you contributed nothing to the development of his company, and that the lifestyle you enjoyed was primarily funded through his earnings. This was blatantly untrue. When Richard first started his investment firm, I had contributed a significant portion of the initial capital from my inheritance and real estate commissions. Throughout our marriage, my income had often supported us during leaner periods in his business. Moreover, I had frequently entertained his clients, maintained our social connections, and even provided real estate services to many of his business associates. Can he get away with this? I asked. Maria's expression hardened. Not if I have anything to say about it. But we need to be strategic. Richard has clearly been planning this for years, moving assets, adjusting ownership records, and creating a paper trail that diminishes your role. She leaned forward. Madeline, I need to ask you something important. Is there any documentation from the early years, anything that proves your financial contributions to his business or joint ownership of the assets he's now claiming as separate property? I thought carefully. There might be. I maintained files of all our major financial decisions. They would be in my home office, possibly in the safe. Get those documents. Every receipt, every bank statement, every legal agreement from the beginning of your marriage, especially around the time Richard started his company. As I left Maria's office, my mind was racing. The depth of Richard's betrayal continued to unfold. This wasn't just about an affair or growing apart. He had been systematically preparing to cut me out financially, likely for years, while continuing to benefit from my contributions to our shared life. When I returned home, I headed straight to my home office and opened the safe, hidden behind a landscape painting. Inside were decades of important documents organized with the same meticulous attention I brought to my real estate business. I found what we needed: bank statements showing my contributions to Richard's startup capital, original partnership agreements listing me as a minority stakeholder in his firm, and documentation of real estate transactions I had conducted that directly benefited his business interests. Most damning of all was a letter from Richard written 15 years ago on our anniversary, explicitly acknowledging my financial and practical support in building his business. "None of this would have been possible without you, Maddie," he had written. "Your belief in me, your financial support when we were starting out, and your continuing partnership in all areas of our life together have made this success story possible." I also discovered original deeds to properties purchased with my commission income, but later transferred into complex ownership structures under Richard's control. I presented these findings to Maria, who immediately brought in a forensic accountant named David Chen. David was soft-spoken with a methodical approach that inspired confidence. "This is classic financial infidelity," David explained after reviewing our documents. "Your husband has been engaging in a systematic effort to separate you from assets that are rightfully joint property." David's investigation revealed shell companies, asset transfers to offshore accounts, and a complex web of financial arrangements designed to shield wealth from being classified as marital property. "The good news," David continued, "is that he's made some mistakes. The paper trail doesn't fully cover his tracks, and with the original documents you've provided, we can establish a clear timeline of deception." Maria developed a comprehensive strategy. We would allow Richard to think his plan was working, let him believe I was defeated and willing to accept his unfair terms. Meanwhile, we would prepare a devastating countermove for the final signing meeting. "He's expecting you to either fight him openly from the beginning, which would give him time to adjust his strategy, or to capitulate entirely," Maria explained. "The element of surprise is our greatest advantage." We also made the difficult decision not to tell James about the affair yet. The knowledge would devastate him, and there was a risk that in his emotional state, he might confront Richard or Sarah, prematurely alerting them to our awareness. "Once the divorce settlement is secured, you can decide when and how to tell your son," Maria advised. "But for now, maintaining the element of surprise is crucial." The strategy required me to maintain a painful charade, pretending ignorance of both the affair and the financial deception. I would need to interact with Richard, possibly even Sarah, without revealing what I knew. "Can you do this, Madeline?" Maria asked. "It requires extraordinary composure." I thought about the 3 decades I had given to a man who could betray me so completely. I thought about my son unwittingly married to a woman capable of such deception. "Yes," I said firmly, "I can do whatever it takes to secure what's rightfully mine and protect my son's future." I spent the next weeks working closely with Maria and David, documenting every financial transaction we could trace, preparing affidavits from business associates who could testify to my role in building our wealth, and gathering irrefutable evidence of Richard's systematic financial deception. Frank, the private investigator, continued his work as well, now focused on possible financial collusion between Richard and Sarah. His findings were disturbing. Sarah, it seemed, had been actively helping Richard hide assets, using her family connections to facilitate transactions, and even allowing accounts to be opened in her name. This goes beyond an affair, Maria said gravely. This is conspiracy to commit fraud. Armed with this knowledge and evidence, we prepared our counterattack. Maria drafted alternative settlement documents that reflected a fair division of assets, including my rightful share of the business interests and investment portfolios. David prepared a comprehensive financial analysis demonstrating the true value of the marital estate and documenting the systematic attempts to hide assets. Frank compiled his evidence of the affair and financial collusion into a clear chronological presentation that would be difficult to dispute. We were ready. The final step was to set a date for the settlement signing. Richard, confident in his strategy, eagerly proposed meeting at his attorney's office the following week. Perfect, I said, maintaining the pretense that I was beaten down and ready to accept his terms. I just want this to be over. As the day approached, I rehearsed maintaining my composure when faced with Richard's smug confidence and his attorney's condescension. I practiced the exact moment when I would reveal that I knew everything, visualizing their expressions changing from victory to shock. It was a performance I never wanted to give, but was determined to execute perfectly. The week before the scheduled signing was one of the most challenging of my life. Each day required me to maintain a facade of ignorance and defeat while secretly preparing for the confrontation that would change everything. Richard called on Monday morning, his voice carrying that false cheerfulness he had adopted since our separation. Just confirming our meeting next Thursday at 2 o'clock, Franklin's office, he said, referring to his attorney. I'll be there, I replied, keeping my tone neutral. Great. And Madeline? He paused. I think you're making the right decision. This clean break is what's best for everyone. The audacity of his statement nearly broke my composure. A clean break. After methodically planning to deny me my fair share of our 30-year partnership while sleeping with our daughter-in-law, I took a deep breath. I just want it over with Richard, I said, which was the only honest part of our conversation. Absolutely. Oh, and I hope you don't mind, but I've invited James to join us afterward for dinner to celebrate moving forward. Sarah might come too. My stomach lurched at the thought of them celebrating what they thought would be their victory. The image of Sarah sitting beside Richard, both of them smirking at having successfully manipulated both James and me, made my blood boil. That's fine, I lied. Though I might not stay long, I have a client meeting later. Always working, Richard said with a condescending chuckle. Well, see you Thursday. The call ended, and I immediately phoned Maria to relay this new development. He's invited James and possibly Sarah to dinner after the signing, I explained. This complicates things. Maria was quiet for a moment. Actually, this might work in our favor. If James is nearby when the truth comes out, it saves you the painful task of telling him separately, but we should prepare him for what he's going to learn. We discussed various approaches, ultimately deciding that I would meet with James privately after the signing, but before the dinner, using the brief window to explain what had happened before he encountered his father and wife. On Tuesday, I received an unexpected call from James himself. Mom, I wanted to check in before Thursday, he said, his voice tinged with concern. Dad mentioned you've agreed to the settlement terms. Are you sure you're being reasonable about this? You know how you can get emotional sometimes. I gripped the phone tighter, recognizing Richard's influence in my son's words. What exactly did your father tell you about the settlement? I asked carefully. Just that it's fair considering he built the business and you'll be keeping the house. He seemed worried that you might change your mind at the last minute. I see, I said, keeping my voice even despite the anger rising within me. James, I assure you I'm approaching this very rationally. I've reviewed everything carefully with my attorney. Good. He sounded relieved. I just want this to be over so we can all move forward as a family, even if it looks different now. My heart ached for him, completely unaware of how profoundly his family had already been altered by betrayal. I want that too, sweetheart, I said softly. Wednesday brought the most difficult encounter yet. Sarah appeared at my door unannounced, a sympathetic smile plastered on her face, and a bottle of wine in hand. "I thought you might need some company," she said, breezing into my home as though she had every right to be there. "Tomorrow's going to be tough, and I wanted you to know that I'm here for you." I let her in, curious about her motivations, and determined to maintain my charade for just one more day. We sat in the living room, Sarah pouring generous glasses of wine, while I discreetly set my glass aside untouched. "Richard's worried you might be having second thoughts," she said, getting straight to the point. "He really wants this to be amicable." "Does he?" I asked, unable to keep a hint of irony from my voice. Sarah either didn't notice or chose to ignore it. "Absolutely. And I want to help however I can. This transition is hard on everyone, especially James. He's torn between his loyalty to you and his relationship with his father." The mention of my son from the lips of the woman betraying him made my skin crawl. I wondered how she could sit there looking me in the eye while carrying on with my husband behind James's back. "That's very thoughtful of you," I managed. "But I'm fine, really. I've accepted that the marriage is over." Sarah leaned forward, her expression serious. "Are you sure you're comfortable with the financial arrangements Richard mentioned? You seemed hesitant about some aspects." So that was it. She was fishing for information, trying to gauge whether I truly intended to sign the unfair agreement. I wondered how much she knew about the financial deception, whether she was an active participant or merely benefiting from Richard's schemes. "I've reviewed everything with my lawyer," I said vaguely. "At this point, I just want closure." Sarah seemed satisfied with this answer, relaxing back into the sofa. "That's good to hear. Richard feels terrible about how things ended, you know. He still cares about you." The brazen lie nearly made me laugh out loud. Instead, I nodded solemnly. 30 years is a long time. There are bound to be complicated feelings. We made small talk for another half hour, during which I learned that Sarah had rearranged her schedule to attend both the signing and the dinner afterward, claiming she wanted to support both Richard and James during this difficult transition. After she left, I immediately called Frank to update him. "She was clearly sent to verify that I'm still compliant," I told him. "They're worried I might have discovered something." "They're right to be worried," Frank replied. "I've got the final piece of evidence we needed. Sarah and Richard met with his accountant yesterday. I managed to photograph them entering and leaving the building together, and my contact inside confirmed they were discussing asset transfers scheduled to take place immediately after your divorce is finalized." This confirmed what we had suspected. Not only were they having an affair, but they were actively conspiring to manage the wealth that rightfully belonged in part to me and in part to my son. That evening, Maria, David, Frank, and I held our final strategy meeting. We reviewed every document, rehearsed the sequence of events for the following day, and made contingency plans for various scenarios. "Remember," Maria said as we concluded, "maintain the pretense until I give the signal. Let Richard and his attorney believe they've won until the very last moment." I barely slept that night, my mind cycling through all that had happened and all that was yet to come. By dawn, I was exhausted but resolute. I dressed carefully in a tailored navy suit that projected both professionalism and strength, applied my makeup with precision, and prepared to deliver the performance of my life. Before leaving for the attorney's office, I checked my home safe one last time. There, among the documents we had already cataloged, I discovered something I had overlooked: the original trust documents for a family trust Richard had established for James. The documents clearly specified that the trust was funded with joint marital assets, contradicting Richard's recent claim that he had funded it solely from his separate property. It was the final piece of evidence confirming the extent of his deception. I quickly photographed the documents and sent them to Maria, then placed the originals in my briefcase. I took a moment to center myself, breathing deeply and focusing on the justice I was about to secure, not just for myself, but for James as well. Richard and Sarah had betrayed us both in the most profound way possible. Tomorrow would bring pain for my son, but also the truth he deserved to know. With that thought firmly in mind, I left for the attorney's office, ready to reveal the carefully constructed web of lies Richard had built and to reclaim what was rightfully mine. Franklin Reed's law office occupied the entire 20th floor of a gleaming tower in downtown Boston. The reception area featured plush leather seating, abstract artwork, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the harbor. The space was designed to intimidate, to remind clients and opponents alike of the wealth and power concentrated within these walls. I arrived 30 minutes early as planned with Maria. We needed time to prepare mentally and to ensure all our documents were in perfect order. Maria met me in the lobby dressed in a crisp charcoal suit that projected authority. "Are you ready?" she asked, her eyes searching mine for any sign of hesitation. I nodded firmly. "Absolutely." We were shown to a small conference room to wait and make our final preparations. Frank, our private investigator, would remain in the reception area until called. David, the forensic accountant, would join us precisely 10 minutes into the meeting, giving Richard and his attorney time to present their settlement before we revealed our counterattack. At exactly 2 o'clock, Richard arrived with his attorney, Franklin Reed. Franklin was in his 60s with silver hair and the confident bearing of someone accustomed to winning. Richard looked polished and self-assured in an expensive suit, his expression one of contained triumph. What I hadn't expected was Sarah's presence. She followed them into the large conference room where we would conduct our business, offering me a sympathetic smile that turned my stomach. "I hope you don't mind," Richard said smoothly. "Sarah's been such a support through all this. I asked her to join us." Maria and I exchanged a subtle glance. This was unexpected but could work to our advantage. "Of course not," I replied, my voice betraying nothing of the rage and disgust I felt. We took our seats around the massive conference table, Richard and Franklin on one side, Maria and I on the other, with Sarah positioned slightly behind Richard, as if to emphasize her supporting role in his life. Franklin began with practiced cordiality. "We're gathered today to finalize the dissolution of marriage between Richard and Madeline Baker. I believe we've reached an agreement that both parties find acceptable." Maria maintained a neutral expression. "We're prepared to review the final documents." Franklin nodded and opened an expensive leather portfolio, removing a thick document and sliding it across the table. "This settlement agreement reflects the terms we've discussed. It provides for an equitable division of assets while recognizing the separate nature of certain properties and business interests." I watched Richard as Franklin spoke. He maintained a mask of appropriate solemnity, but I could see the satisfaction in his eyes. He thought he had won. Franklin continued his overview, pointing out key provisions with his manicured finger. "Mrs. Baker will retain the family home valued at approximately $2 million, her personal retirement accounts totaling $800,000, and the art collection valued at $350,000. Mr. Baker will provide alimony of $12,000 monthly for 5 years. He paused, letting the figures sink in as if they were extraordinarily generous. Mr. Baker will retain full ownership of Baker Investment Strategies, the vacation properties in Cape Cod and Vail, and his personal investment portfolios. What Franklin tactfully omitted was that the business alone was worth over $30 million, the vacation properties another $5 million combined, and the investment portfolios held nearly $12 million. All told, Richard was attempting to walk away with over 90% of our actual wealth. "We've also included provisions regarding the family trust for James," Franklin continued. "As Mr. Baker was the sole funder of the trust, he will retain control as trustee." I felt a flash of anger at this blatant lie, but maintained my composed facade. "Take your time to review the documents," Franklin said magnanimously, sitting back in his chair. Maria and I made a show of carefully reading through the pages, occasionally whispering to each other, as if clarifying minor points. I could feel Richard's gaze on me, watching for any sign of resistance or distress. After 20 minutes of this performance, Maria looked up. "We'd like a moment to discuss this privately, if you don't mind." Franklin nodded graciously. "Of course. Take all the time you need." Maria and I gathered our papers and stepped into the smaller conference room where we had waited earlier. As soon as the door closed behind us, Maria's professional mask dropped. "Unbelievable," she muttered. "He's actually trying to get away with this." "Not for long," I replied, a sense of calm determination washing over me. We used this private moment to contact David and Frank, confirming they were ready. Then we returned to the conference room where Richard was checking his watch impatiently. "Have you had sufficient time to review?" Franklin asked as we resumed our seats. Maria nodded. "Yes, thank you. However, before Mrs. Baker signs, we have some alternative documentation we'd like to present." A flicker of concern crossed Richard's face, quickly masked. Franklin maintained his professional demeanor, though his eyes narrowed slightly. "Alternative documentation, yes," Maria replied calmly, opening her briefcase. "We've prepared a more equitable settlement agreement that better reflects the true nature of the marital assets and Mrs. Baker's contributions to the marriage." She removed a document similar in thickness to Franklin's and placed it on the table. "This revised agreement includes several key differences from your proposal." Richard leaned forward, his jaw tightening. "We've already agreed to terms. This is completely inappropriate." "Actually," I spoke for the first time, my voice steady, "I never agreed to anything. You assumed I would accept whatever you offered." Maria continued as if there had been no interruption. "Our proposed settlement correctly identifies Baker Investment Strategies as marital property given Mrs. Baker's significant financial contributions to its founding and growth." She slid across the bank statements and the original business documents I had found. "As you can see, Mrs. Baker contributed over 60% of the initial capital from her inheritance and real estate commissions. She also provided ongoing financial support during the company's first 5 years." Richard's face had gone pale. Franklin picked up the documents, scanning them with growing concern. "Furthermore," Maria continued, "we have documentation proving that the vacation properties were purchased primarily with Mrs. Baker's real estate commission income, not Mr. Baker's business earnings as he has claimed." Franklin cleared his throat. "These are historical documents. The business has grown significantly under Mr. Baker's management since these early investments." "Yes," Maria agreed. "And Massachusetts law is clear that growth of marital assets remains marital property regardless of which spouse directly managed the investment." She turned to Sarah, who had been watching the exchange with increasing discomfort. "Ms. Baker, were you aware that your father-in-law has been systematically hiding marital assets in preparation for this divorce?" Sarah's eyes widened. "I don't know anything about their finances," she said quickly. "I'm just here for moral support." "Are you?" Maria asked. "That's interesting because we have evidence suggesting otherwise." This was the signal I had been waiting for. I nodded to Maria, who opened the door to admit Frank and David. "This is Frank Donovan, our private investigator, and David Chin, our forensic accountant." Maria introduced them. "They've compiled some information that's directly relevant to these proceedings." David spoke first, his quiet voice commanding attention. "My financial analysis has uncovered a complex network of asset transfers designed to shield marital property from equitable distribution." He opened his laptop, displaying charts and diagrams, illustrating the movement of money through various accounts and shell companies. "Over the past 3 years, Mr. Baker has systematically transferred approximately $28 million of marital assets into vehicles that he incorrectly classified as separate property." Franklin looked genuinely shocked. He turned to Richard, who had gone from pale to flushed. "This is ridiculous," Richard sputtered. "You can't possibly prove—" "Actually, we can," David interrupted, unusually assertive for his typically mild-mannered personality. "I've traced every transaction, including those routed through accounts in the name of Sarah Baker." Sarah gasped. "That's not— I didn't—" "Ms. Baker," Frank stepped forward, "we have documented evidence of your involvement in these financial matters. But that's not all we've uncovered." He placed a folder on the table. "While investigating the financial aspects of this case, we also discovered evidence of a personal relationship between you and Mr. Baker Sr." The room went completely still. Franklin looked between Richard and Sarah with dawning horror. This was clearly news to him. Frank opened the folder, revealing photographs of Richard and Sarah together in various intimate settings. These document a relationship spanning approximately 14 months, beginning well before the Bakers separated. Sarah had gone completely white, her hands trembling. Richard's expression had hardened into something ugly and defensive. "This is a complete invasion of privacy," he growled. "Infidelity may not directly impact the financial settlement in Massachusetts," Maria acknowledged, "but conspiracy to hide assets does, and we have evidence that Ms. Baker actively assisted in concealing marital assets, perhaps motivated by her personal relationship with Mr. Baker." She turned to me, giving me the floor. This was my moment. I looked directly at Richard, then at Sarah. "I discovered your affair a week ago when I dropped off those medical records at your apartment. Sarah's perfume, her bracelet, the one James gave you for your anniversary," I said, turning to her. "I found your text messages, your photos. I know everything." Sarah began to cry silently. Richard maintained his stony expression. "I've known about the financial deception for longer," I continued. "Did you really think I wouldn't fight for what's rightfully mine after 30 years of marriage? Did you think I would just roll over and accept being discarded?" The door to the conference room opened suddenly and James walked in. The blood drained from my face. He wasn't supposed to be here yet. We had planned to tell him privately after the meeting. "Sorry I'm early," he said, then stopped, taking in the tense scene. "What's going on? Why is everyone here? Sarah, why are you crying?" No one spoke. James looked around in confusion, then spotted the photographs still spread across the table. He moved closer, his expression changing from confusion to disbelief to horror as he recognized his wife and father in clearly intimate situations. "What is this?" he whispered, picking up one of the photos. "What the hell is this?" Richard finally broke his silence. "James, we need to talk about this privately. This isn't how we wanted you to find out." "Find out what?" James's voice rose. "That my wife and my father are having an affair. That's what these look like. Please tell me that's not what these are." Sarah stood, reaching for him. "James, please, I can explain." He stepped back from her outstretched hand as if it were contaminated. "Explain what? How long has this been going on? Were you ever going to tell me it's not what it looks like?" Richard attempted, but his words rang hollow in the face of the evidence spread across the table. "Really?" James picked up another photo, this one showing Richard and Sarah kissing. "Because it looks like my father and my wife are having an affair. It looks like you've both been lying to me and to Mom. Is that not what's happening here?" Richard's attorney, Franklin, had been observing this family implosion with growing discomfort. He gathered his papers and cleared his throat. "I think we should adjourn this meeting and reconvene when emotions aren't so raw." "No," I said firmly. "We are going to finish this today. Richard wants a divorce, fine, but it will be on fair terms, not the fraudulent agreement he tried to force on me." James was still staring at the photographs, his world visibly crumbling around him. "How long?" he asked again, his voice cracking. "How long has this been going on?" Frank answered, when neither Richard nor Sarah could. "Based on our investigation, approximately 14 months. James did the math quickly. "So when we celebrated our 6th wedding anniversary, when we spent Christmas together last year, when we scattered Grandma's ashes," each question was directed at Sarah, who could only sob in response. He turned to his father. "And you? While you were still married to Mom, while you were telling me she was the one giving up on your marriage?" Richard's face hardened. "You don't understand the complexity of the situation, James. Your mother and I had been growing apart for years. So you decided to sleep with my wife." James's voice rose to a shout. "That was your solution?" I moved to my son's side, placing a hand on his arm. "James, I'm so sorry. I only discovered this myself a week ago. I was going to tell you privately after this meeting." He turned to me, his eyes filled with pain and confusion. "You knew, and you didn't tell me immediately." "I needed to secure the divorce settlement first," I explained gently. "If they had known I discovered the affair, they might have hidden more evidence or changed their strategy. I was protecting both of us." James nodded slowly, beginning to understand. He looked back at Sarah and Richard, his expression hardening. I want nothing to do with either of you. He turned to Franklin. I assume you'll be handling her divorce as well, because I'll be filing immediately. Sarah sobbed harder. James, please, we can work through this. There's nothing to work through, he cut her off. You slept with my father. There's no coming back from that. The room fell into heavy silence, broken only by Sarah's continued sobs. Franklin looked deeply uncomfortable, clearly regretting his involvement in what had become a spectacular implosion of family relationships. Maria seized the moment. Given these revelations and the evidence of financial misconduct, we propose proceeding with our revised settlement agreement. It provides for a 65-35 split of all marital assets in Mrs. Baker's favor, reflecting both her contributions and Mr. Baker's attempt to defraud her. Franklin looked to Richard, who sat slumped in his chair, the picture of defeat. Richard, do you want to review this proposal or continue this another day? Richard shook his head, suddenly looking much older than his 59 years. Just give me the papers. I'll sign. And just like that, the victory I had fought for was mine. Not just the financial settlement I deserved, but the truth lay bare for everyone to see. As painful as it was for James, the exposure of Richard and Sarah's betrayal had freed us both from their web of lies. As Richard signed page after page of the revised agreement, I felt no triumph, only a profound sadness for what had been lost, and relief that the worst was finally over. The months following that devastating day in the attorney's office were a time of profound adjustment and healing for both James and me. The divorce was finalized quickly, with Richard offering no further resistance to the terms we had proposed. Similarly, James's divorce from Sarah proceeded without contest, as she had neither the moral ground nor the financial resources to fight it after her complicity with Richard was exposed. I moved out of our family home, unable to continue living in a space filled with 30 years of memories that now felt tainted. Instead, I purchased a beautiful beachfront property in Gloucester, about an hour north of Boston. The house was smaller than our family home, but featured floor-to-ceiling windows that filled every room with natural light and offered breathtaking views of the Atlantic Ocean. James, devastated by the dual betrayal of his father and wife, initially stayed with me while he processed his grief and anger. At 32, he had never expected to be starting over, rebuilding his life from the ground up. We spent many evenings sitting on my deck overlooking the ocean, sometimes talking for hours, sometimes sitting in companionable silence as we each worked through our private thoughts. I keep replaying everything in my mind, James confessed one evening, about 2 months after the revelations, trying to see the signs I missed, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. I've been doing the same thing, I admitted, but the truth is, we trusted the people we loved. That's not a mistake, James. That's how relationships are supposed to work. He nodded slowly, staring out at the waves. I feel so stupid. All those times Sarah said she was meeting friends or working late. And all those times I believed Richard was on business trips, I added softly. We weren't stupid. We were betrayed by people who made deliberate choices to lie to us. Therapy became an essential part of my healing journey. Dr. Elaine Kaufman, a compassionate woman in her 60s who specialized in helping people through major life transitions, helped me navigate the complex emotions of betrayal, divorce, and rebuilding. What you're experiencing is a form of grief, she explained during one of our early sessions. You're grieving not just the end of your marriage, but the loss of the narrative you believed about your life together. It's a profound form of disorientation. With Dr. Kaufman's guidance, I learned to acknowledge my pain without letting it consume me. I allowed myself to feel angry, devastated, and even occasionally nostalgic for the good parts of my marriage, all without judgment. The financial settlement gave me a level of security and independence that many divorced women my age never experience. I was determined to use these resources not just for my own comfort, but to create something meaningful from the ashes of my marriage. 6 months after the divorce, I established the New Beginnings Foundation, a nonprofit organization dedicated to helping women achieve financial literacy and independence after divorce or widowhood. We offered workshops, one-on-one counseling, and grants for education or starting small businesses. The idea came from my own experience. I explained to a local reporter who covered our launch event. Even though I had my own career, I realized how vulnerable I might have been if I hadn't discovered Richard's deception. Too many women find themselves financially adrift after a long marriage ends. The foundation gave me a renewed sense of purpose. Each woman who attended our workshops or received our support reminded me that something positive could emerge from even the most painful experiences. James found his own path to healing. After 6 months of living in a spare room in my new home, he purchased a condo in Cambridge and threw himself into his consulting work. He also began attending a support group for people who had experienced similar betrayals. "It helps to know I'm not alone," he told me over dinner one Sunday evening. "Some of the stories make mine seem almost tame by comparison." "Is that possible?" I asked with a small smile. He laughed, a sound I had feared I might never hear again in those early raw days. "Apparently, there's a guy whose wife ran off with his brother and his best friend at the same time. The three of them are now living together in Colorado. We could laugh about it now, at least sometimes." The sharp edges of pain were slowly being worn smooth by time and the deliberate work of healing. Richard attempted to contact me several times in the first year after our divorce. At first, I refused any communication, letting all interactions flow through our attorneys. Eventually, I agreed to a coffee meeting, curious about what he might have to say. "I made a terrible mistake, Maddie," he said, looking older and somehow diminished in the bright light of the cafe. "Sarah left me 3 months ago, for a tech executive 20 years younger than me, with twice my net worth." He laughed bitterly. "Karma, I suppose." I felt no satisfaction at his pain, just a dull sadness for the man I had once loved so deeply. "What do you want from me, Richard?" "A second chance," he said, reaching for my hand across the table. "We had 30 good years before things went wrong. We could try again." I gently withdrew my hand. "No, Richard, we can't go back. Too much has been broken." "Is there someone else?" he asked, a flash of the old possessiveness in his eyes. I thought about Thomas, a kind-hearted architect I had met through a mutual friend. We had been dating casually for a few months, enjoying theater performances and long walks along the beach. It was too new to know where it might lead, but his company brought me joy. "My life is my own now," I said simply, "and I'm discovering that I like it that way." Richard nodded, accepting my answer with surprising grace. "I hope you find happiness, Madeline." "I mean that." "I hope you find peace, Richard," I replied, and I meant it too. As the first anniversary of my divorce approached, I took my first solo international trip to Italy, a country I had always wanted to explore, but had never visited during my marriage. For 3 glorious weeks, I wandered through ancient cities, savored incredible food, and allowed myself to be fully present in each moment without the weight of the past dragging at my heels. Standing on a terrace in Positano, watching the sunset paint the Mediterranean in shades of gold and pink, I felt a profound sense of gratitude wash over me. Not for the betrayal, never for that, but for the strength I had found in its aftermath. I had survived the unimaginable. I had protected myself and my son. I had built a new life that, while different from anything I had envisioned, was rich with possibility and joy. James was healing too. When I returned from Italy, he introduced me to Catherine, a pediatric surgeon he had been dating for a few months. The way he looked at her, with cautious hope, rather than the wounded wariness that had become his default expression, told me that he too was finding his way forward. Life continues to unfold in unexpected ways. There are still difficult days, moments when grief or anger surface without warning, but they no longer define me. What I've learned through this painful journey is that our worth is not determined by how others treat us, but by how we respond to life's challenges. The betrayal I experienced was never about my inadequacy, but about the choices Richard and Sarah made. The strength I found in standing up for myself and refusing to be diminished by their actions revealed a resilience I never knew I possessed. If you're experiencing betrayal or loss, please know that the pain, while overwhelming now, will not always be this acute. Healing is not a straight line, but a winding path with setbacks and victories. Be patient with yourself. Surround yourself with people who validate your experiences rather than minimize them. And remember that your story doesn't end with the betrayal, it continues with how you choose to write the next chapters. Before I go, I'd love to hear about your own experiences with betrayal and healing. What helped you through your darkest moments? Have you found unexpected gifts in the process of rebuilding your life? Please share in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe if this story resonated with you. Your support helps me continue sharing these difficult but ultimately hopeful journeys of resilience and renewal. Thank you for listening, and remember, the best revenge isn't getting even, it's living well. And trust me, living well is exactly what I intend to keep doing.